My name's Jeff Kehoe. I'm an editor at Harvard Business Review and Harvard Business Review Press. Delighted to be here for this panel on Beyond Better. How do we know we're changing the status quo? I want to say a quick word on how we're going to structure the session. There's going to be an Act 1 where I'll be talking with these two wonderful, distinguished folks up on stage now. Then there will be an Act 2 where we will invite a few more people, probably very well known to you, up on the stage and continue the conversation and hopefully get to Act 3 where we'll have some time for interaction with all of you and your questions. So first I want to welcome Sally Osberg and Roger Martin. It's been said quite a bit here in different sessions for the guests that they need no introduction, and I'll say it again. These folks really don't need any introduction, but I'll just say a quick word. Roger is the academic director of the Martin Prosperity Institute, former dean of the Rotman School of Management, distinguished author of many books, including several I'm proud to say that I worked as an editor on for Harvard Business Review Press, and also wise strategy counsel to many leaders of all different kinds of enterprises. Sally really doesn't need an introduction here. She's driving force behind this event, behind all that the Skoll Foundation does, supporting social entrepreneurship around the world, and especially the Skoll Foundation Awards and this forum, which is just such an impressive, wonderful event. I was just saying to Sally how when Jeff Skoll said this place is filled with positive energy, I completely agreed with that. You can really feel it here. So let's give a nice welcome to these two. I really want to dive right in and get the conversation going. All of you can see there's a magazine on your table in front of you, and there is an excellent article by these two that's in the magazine. I'm also pleased to say that I am working with Roger and Sally on a book on the same topic, a little bit different title, Getting Beyond Better, How Social Entrepreneurship Works, that will be coming out in the fall. And I was thinking, Clay Christensen, HBS professor, says that every product has a job to do. So if we think of this article and the coming book as a kind of product that's going to be successful in the world, what's the job that it's doing?
Well, first of all, welcome to all of you, and a special welcome to my boss and his family, who are all seated up here. So I'm going to be on my best behavior. I have a job to do, and that's represent the foundation, the work we do, and all of you as very best I can. In the book, we actually talk about the job we needed to do at the Skoll Foundation after our first couple of years of channeling Jeff's vision and really his DNA around entrepreneurs, that special kind of entrepreneur who really brings the disruptive impact to solving the world's most pressing problems. But we needed a definition. We needed to really understand this so that we could choose among the hundreds of folks who were banging on our doors, the wonderful, wonderful proposals that came our way. We needed to apply some criteria. We needed to understand what it is we were looking for and how to make the best of our precious resources. Because even though we're a grant-making foundation, our resources are finite, and believe me, we want to make them go as far as possible. So with that, and with the help of Roger Martin, who's one of our wonderful board directors and a genius when it comes to strategy, and was no way going to let us off the hook in thinking in a very non-rigorous way about this, we actually started to clarify what it is social entrepreneurship is. And we came to the realization that it's about equilibrium change, that social entrepreneurs attack systems and equilibria in society that are stuck, that have come to be because of a set of actors, because of a set of forces that are held in place and that desperately need to change. These equilibria lead to the marginalization, suffering, or large-scale disadvantage of some segment of society or some element of society much more broadly, as in environmental degradation. So once we got that clarity, we could really look at these applicants and we could look at social entrepreneurs and we could start to understand those who were trying to do good in the world and those who were on an order of magnitude journey to make that kind of impact in the world. That was our job, and that's where the definition arose.
Yeah, and I would also just say part, I think, of the job of the book is to provide would-be social entrepreneurs with some ideas for how they can create that equilibrium change. What are the mechanisms that we've seen out there that work? Because now we have the real benefit of having 91, or after tomorrow night, 91 SASE award-winning organizations, over 100 social entrepreneurs, and so we wanted to take all of that, the knowledge we could gain from that, and be able to provide it back to the folks who want to be social entrepreneurs. Here are some models for how to think about it, and also I think we'd love to see as many funders enter the field and support it as possible, and I think it makes it easier for funders to say, I will support this thing called social entrepreneurship if they can understand what it is and identify social entrepreneurs and have a sense of what models work, so that hopefully will just grow the pie, and there will be more people investing in this great thing called social entrepreneurship. So that was part, I think, of also the job that we hope it does.
I'd love it if you could say even a little bit more about the job that it's doing. I think probably a lot of people here know that the original articulation of this was some years ago in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, a terrific article that's had huge impact. What are the ways, can you be a little bit more specific and concrete about what are the ways that your thinking and practice since that article, that's reflected in the article and in the book, goes beyond that? You started to say a bit about that with the framework, Roger, but can you say a bit more and fill in the picture?
Yeah, sure. And that is one of the things that I think has been fun and enjoyable about this is that it's been a learning process. We've been working and learning along the way, and yeah, the Stanford article, I guess it's the 2006 or 2007. It's 2007, so 8 years ago. I think the things we've learned since then are, so we established the notion in that article that it's about equilibrium change and creating an equilibrium change. And at that point we said, it's great if they can. And I think what's evolved is we've tried to look at what mechanisms they use to drive the equilibrium change. And I guess a couple of the things that we learned, and Sally, there's probably others that you'll think of too, are one is we made this distinction between social entrepreneurship and social advocacy, and now we have more of a view that those two things are often complements of one another, and equilibrium change can be driven by a social entrepreneur who creates a product or service that starts a transformation, but then if they're a great advocate for it, they can bring more resources to bear, like government resources to bear to drive it faster. So we've seen the relationship there. And I guess the other thing that struck me as important learning is just how important for social entrepreneurs the cost structure of what they do is. If you're going to drive equilibrium change, you've got to somehow create a model that has decreasing costs with scale. As if your costs are the same as you do more of it, it just is very expensive. But if you can create a cool platform, like Kiva, you create a cool platform where you spend up front to create the platform, but then as more and more people use it, actually the costs per user fall. That seems to be very important in driving equilibrium change. So I guess those would be learnings since the article. Sally?
Yeah, and I'd say too, one of the really vexed questions in social entrepreneurship is the unit of analysis. So who is the beneficiary? Whom are we trying to help? And what are we paying attention to really understand whether we're making the kind of difference we're trying to make? So there's a model for change that has to factor in this unit cost diminution over time, so the more resources will go even farther as the innovation scales. At the same time, being very clear about that unit of analysis is also tricky, because social entrepreneurs really are systemic thinkers, and they understand that these variables all influence one another. Nonetheless, one of the real qualities of entrepreneurship is focus. So being very clear about that unit of analysis is what leads one to be able to make the investment in a model that can actually scale effectively. So that's another lesson, and not an easy thing to determine, but one of the distinguishing hallmarks of a social entrepreneur. The other thing, if I can I'm just on a roll here for a minute. So
Go. Don't let me stop you.
So I was thinking about what Jacqueline said last night about belief and what we keep and what we leave behind. And I was thinking it was really interesting to me that we're no longer quite fighting the battle for social entrepreneurs as entrepreneurs. And that was something we tried to do in the original article too, was really anchor social entrepreneurship in entrepreneurship. Jean-Baptiste Say and his, leveraging resources to their highest and best use. That's what social entrepreneurs do. That's what entrepreneurs do. Schumpeter, of course, the force of creative destruction. Again, that's equilibrium change. That's what entrepreneurs do. That's what social entrepreneurs do. But we're no longer fighting that battle. We can move on. And so the real challenge today is summoning the body of evidence that tell us what social entrepreneur is getting done in the world, what social entrepreneurship is getting done, and how it can provide real lessons and impetus for policy and for business to actually track this wave and make the better world that we all know is possible.
And there's one, if you want, there's one more thing that at least struck me as really interesting as we got into the social entrepreneurs more, and that is the degree to which they have to balance a set of tensions. We write about it in the book. So the great social entrepreneurs have to, at the same time, abhor the current equilibrium, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be motivated to do anything. If they liked the current equilibrium, they'd say, why do I want to change it? But at the same time as abhorring it, they have to appreciate it enough to understand kind of why it's the way it is. And we talk about the wonderful Molly Melching and Tostan in it. She abhorred the practice of female genital mutilation, but she appreciated why it happened well enough to get a handle on how to change it. And they have to balance the notion that they're an expert, but they're also an apprentice, right? So they bring some expertise to bear, otherwise they wouldn't be able to do anything particularly useful, but they also have to apprentice and really learn and understand the system they're working on as if they're an apprentice. And then they have to be able to both experiment and commit, right? So most of the social entrepreneurs that we study didn't sort of come up with the all singing, all dancing idea day one, but at some point they committed to something enough that they could really drive it. And so I've come away from now studying them saying they really walk this incredibly fine line between different sides of the tension. And so if they just are, I abhor this, I'm a super expert, and I know the answer, chances are they're not going to be a successful social entrepreneur, even though you might say, that's very leaderly. You hate this terrible situation, and you're really smart, and you're really committed to an answer, but probably it won't be an answer that drives equilibrium change.
Yeah, it really does seem like a kind of paradox, and you point to that in the book, that often the people who understand these systems best are people who are also invested in the systems and the way things are, and so how you navigate that is a real challenge. I also have been really struck in both the article and the book the way that you approach social entrepreneurship itself as a kind of system. And I think it's apparent even in the book title, How Social Entrepreneurship Works. And a lot is teasing out the different parts, the different actors, the different elements, the different mechanisms and dynamics that lead to social entrepreneurship success. Would you say that you do see it that way? I think the article certainly reflects that, where you're talking about effective way to make the kinds of changes you're talking about are to think about the actors and to think about the technologies. So,
well, I guess I would say we're still students. So what we hope is this book plopped down in the world in 2015 and causes people hopefully to say, oh, I can recognize some of what you're saying, but here's more ways to think about it. I mean, I think our article in 2007 help do that, spur conversation and debate. So I would say I think we have a much better idea how social entrepreneurship works, but my suspicion is the people in this room and others like them who love social entrepreneurship and want to drive it will cause us to learn some more. So we're having fun watching and learning as much as we can, as fast as we can, because it's important, but we don't know everything, that's for sure.
No, we don't. And yet we've made it our job to really look at the different patterns and try to identify them. As Roger just said, this paradoxical journey the social entrepreneurs travel is one of those elements, and of course is the author of The Opposable Mind and Integrative Thinking. That's right up Roger's alley, so that was a real insight that he was able to bring to this work, which is incredibly valuable. But Jeff asked about the social entrepreneurship and the systems that social entrepreneurs attack and the elements of those systems, the actors, the technologies. And in this article, we talk about the technologies as the interaction really of the business models and everything else that's going on in a different system. So it's technologies writ large. But if you just think about any system and the actors who are holding it in place, deforestation, for example, in the Amazon, you think about the rogue loggers, the ranchers, the business interests who soy and cattle. You think about the government that's trying to roll back deforestation. You think about the NGOs who are advocating for the government to make good on its policies. All these actors, and yet the deforestation in the Amazon was going downhill fast. So social entrepreneurship was able to come in, catalyze some of those actors, bring new incentives, and make the government and its policies far more effective. Use of, if Amazon is here, or Beto and Carlos here, anyway, satellite imaging, repurposing an existing technology. So right there you get that cost-effective strategy. There's a technology that's out there. How can I repurpose that and make it work better so that we can monitor deforestation real time? And over the years from 2003, that curve has come down. So deforestation has been reduced 80% over that period of time. There is some volatility. I mean, it's not a perfect downward slope. Inevitably, there are going to be bumps along the way, but everybody in that system is doing the job they need to do a whole lot better as a result of this catalytic force. All these actors are working far more effectively and efficiently together than they were before Amazon, Marina Silva. A lot of the actors started to think about what they could do differently. Now, the title of this session is How We Know It's Working. And that's one of the ways we know if whatever system we're working on, whether it's water and sanitation, whether it's education, whether it's deforestation, if we can look at those trends and see that they're heading in the right direction. That's a high bar, and yet that's the bar we think that social entrepreneurship has to sustain.
before we get to the end of Act 1 here, I want to be sure to touch on the theme of the forum this year, which is belief. And I thought that was just a terrific plenary last night and inspiring what Jeff said about belief and the role of it. And I wonder if you could say a bit, Sally, if we're thinking about and teasing apart the different elements of social entrepreneurship in the article and in the book, where would you integrate belief into that? What kind of role does it play?
It's a great question. And I know, Roger, you always say I'm not supposed to say that, but anyway, I needed a minute to think. So You know, social entrepreneurs have been accused of being overly optimistic. And Nandan and Rohini and I had a little conversation last night where she is accusing her husband of being overly optimistic. And I said that at the Skoll Foundation we have this value, we have this core value that we call tough-minded optimism. And I think that's my belief about how social entrepreneurs go about optimism. They see the opportunity and they ask themselves, if not me, who? If not now, when? They pull up their socks, they get to work, but they keep in their sights this vision for what can be transformed, not just better, it can be transformed, and that's what they work to. Now that's optimism on steroids, but it has the rigor and the determination and the discipline underneath it that to me is so quintessentially socially entrepreneurial.
And if I can just add that one of the things that we sort of hope for by categorizing it as equilibrium change and explaining what it is, I think the great social entrepreneurs already implicitly do that. They say, I'm not just going to make it better, I'm going to sort of fix it. They have a sort of the entrepreneur's mindset, which is, I'm going to fix this thing. We'd like to try to describe what fix looks like and why it's so important, so that more folks who would say, I don't like the current situation, will say, the goal that I should have is I will fix it. I will change that equilibrium. And so part of it maybe is the job of the book is to help make it easier for people to conceptualize what a real fix would look like, so that they can keep their optimism high and their aspirations high.
I think we might be at the end of Act 1, but yes, we are. Okay. There's obviously more to talk about here, but I want to keep things moving along and get to the next part of our conversation. So let me welcome up our three additional wonderful speakers. And why don't you come up first, and then I'll say a quick word of introduction to you. Good. So I really want to get into the conversation quickly, but I feel like I do need to say a quick word of introduction. You've got lots of great information about these wonderful people in front of you, but to my left, your right immediately, is Vicky Colbert. She says that it could be Colbert or Colbert. Really doesn't matter. I pressed her on it, but I could not get a straight answer. So she's the founder and director of Fundación Escuela Nueva and the co-author of the Escuela Nueva model, which has just had huge and growing impact around the world in improving the quality of education. Next to Vicky, Nandan Nilekani was most recently chairman of the Unique Identification Authority of India in the rank of cabinet minister. He co-founded Infosys Technologies and served as co-chairman of the board of directors. He's also the author of Imagining India. To my right, your left, Bill Drayton, founder and CEO of Ashoka and preeminent pioneer in the field of social entrepreneurship. His Everyone a Changemaker model and philosophy continues to grow and deepen in its impact on mindsets and systems around the world. So welcome to our distinguished guests. Let's give them a hand. It's great to have all of you here. The first thing I want to ask is, you were here for Act 1, is there some aspect of the discussion of the framework that Sally and Roger discussed that's reflected in the article and that they talked about in the book that you vehemently disagree with? Or maybe you passionately agree with it and want to expand on it in light of your own specific experience in history. And maybe I'll start with you, Vicky.
Something I disagree with?
disagree with or passionately agree with, feel like you need to add to, complement in
I
some way?
passionately agree with those two dimensions. One in relation to new actors. This has been a life project for more than 35 years. I don't get read anymore for saying so many years. But it's belief. It's belief and passion of what you're doing. And so I totally agree you have to bring new actors. After having been involved in improving quality basic education, especially in developing countries, I totally agree that you have to play the field with all the actors. I have learned after so many years that you need to work with governments if you want to have big impact and coverage. But you need the role of civil society and public-private partnerships to ensure quality and sustainability. So my life project has been holding my baby, Escuela Nueva, which means new school. Nothing new in the philosophy of education, but putting it in practice. So definitely new actors. And the second thing is technology, and I'm not talking about ICT. It's just working on existing technologies, and by this I'm talking mainly about pedagogy, because technologies can change, but changes in pedagogy demonstrate they have the long-lasting benefit. So this is what Escuela Nueva has been doing for many, many years, putting in practice all the principles we know about good educational theory, but putting it in a way that any teacher in the middle of the jungle in Colombia can have results. And I think, so I'm passionately about those two dimensions. I agree with it.
No, I think they've really come out with a great framework of how to look at doing massive equilibrium change. And I think it's about new actors, it's about being passionate about a goal, it's about visualizing a future that other people can't and then going relentlessly towards that. It's about repurposing technology for new purposes. So I think it's a great thing. I could probably add a couple of things, but fundamentally I think absolutely on the right track.
Bill, you wrote a nice little piece that's posted on the Skoll Forum website in response to some of the ideas. Maybe you could say a little bit about that.
Well, I have to admit, listening this morning, I was once again really struck that Sally and Roger and the Skoll team are entrepreneurs operating at the meta level of our field. So they have been absolutely focused, helping leading social entrepreneurs, helping the field, and the best way of doing that is helping us have the biggest possible impact where it's most important. And they're into the how-tos. They're disciplined about it. Just listen to the conversation. And as a result, you keep the focus, but it's constantly changing. And then the third thing that strikes me about it is that this is very unusual. They're operating at the level of mindset change as well as pattern change. And I think when you look at entrepreneurship, those are two different games that have different measures. And very few people operate at the mindset change level, which is where the highest leverage is. And so I hope that we can come back to the issue of mindset change. But I just add another thing. This is what the little piece was saying, that when you read the article and think about it, what you're seeing is that there are more and more entrepreneurs. I mean, look at the forum. And they're bringing equilibrium change. So more and more entrepreneurs who are more skilled, more and more equilibrium changes, faster and faster, bumping one another. And I think we're at or getting to the point where it's not the exception, it's the new norm. And we have to restructure society to deal with that. And that makes social entrepreneurs much more important. Because there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are not. I mean, social entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs for the good of all, but there are a lot of other entrepreneurs who are in it for the shareholders themselves, an ideological purpose, or they just are lazy and don't think about the whole. And so, with no ill intent, they pull us off in bad directions, e.g. the loss of privacy. And you need the social entrepreneurs to keep pulling it back, and we need to be as powerful as possible. So I'm very grateful to the Skoll team for pushing us in our thinking and being a meta leader.
Vicky, you had a specific thought when we were chatting yesterday at lunch about the session about what are the article made you think, and you have thought for a long time yourself, are there factors or conditions required for equilibrium change to happen?
Definitely. Originally, I'm a sociologist, so sociologists are always changing the statu quo. We always want to have revolutions in some way or another. I decided it was a silent revolution. It was an easier way, which was transforming quality basic education initially in Colombia. So I had the possibility of having my good studies in Stanford. I came back with all my theory, all the research findings, everything. And then you start working in developing countries. And you see so many problems, so many problems. Like Charles Leadbeater says, some of the best innovations come from the developing world, from the margins of society, because we have to rethink everything. Education system in Colombia was like a failed company. Nothing worked, no results. I just don't want to make the list of all the problems. But it was it was unbelievable, no results. And and we know the theory for 100 years. We're not going to invent the theory. We know about Montessori, we know about John Dewey, we know about a child-centered learning, we want to know about self-paced learning, we know about cooperative learning, we know about the new role of the teacher for the 21st century. So in a way, the Escuela Nueva, and I'll get back to your question, is like a little story of Cinderella, where we started with the most marginal schools, the invisible schools in the middle of nowhere. But they forced us to rethink everything because nothing was working. So the first thing was, here you have all this good sound educational theory, which is not new. How do you promote child-centered learning, self-paced, cooperative learning, all these things I mentioned, the new role of the teacher for the 21st century, not as an instructor, but as a facilitator, catalyzer. We said all these things 35 years ago. Why? Because the first thing we had to do was that anything from the outset had to be viable, technically speaking. That all these ideas, which are not new, how could a teacher, as I said, in the middle of nowhere, have results? So that would be viable technically. And you cannot find PhDs in the middle of the jungle in Colombia. So viable technically. Politically, we have strong unions in Latin America, so you have to learn to work with the teachers and the unions. The teachers were against the rural multi-grade schools I was working in because it was too much work. So we sort of had to reshape the technology to make it easier for the teacher. Teachers don't have time to plan wonderful lesson plans every day, and in a heterogeneous setting, a multi-grade setting, less. So that it was viable technically, politically, and of course financially. We had to think of cost effectiveness. If we wanted that our local innovation impact national policy like it did in Colombia, reaching 20,000 schools at the end of the 80s, and then I ended up being Vice Minister of Education, we took it to scale. And once the World Bank came into the picture and selected that as one of the 3 innovations that had successfully impacted national policies, we had to think of cost effectiveness. When you start talking to the World Bank, you have to think of unitary cost per child, things like this. So these 3 these conditions we had to have from the outset so that we could have big impact at national level. And then when we were convincing the Vietnamese, like we did, they're taking Escuela Nueva to Vietnam. We had to have these things also in place. So you do have to have conditions when you want to have a local innovation have big impact at national level, definitely. Viable technically, politically, and financially.
So I think it's worth noting, probably most folks have noted that the 3 speakers who just came up for Act 2 have all served at high levels in government as well as outside. So both inside the system at a high level and outside the system. Nandan, what do you think are some of the special challenges of being a social entrepreneur, doing a startup inside the system in government?
Sure. Yeah. So just to give a bit of history, I done a book called Imagining India about 6 years back and talked about the need for an ID system to really address social change and so on. And the government had been contemplating a similar project, so they invited me in 2009 to head this body. At that time, it was just a concept. We realized very quickly that we had to build an ID system in the 21st century. It had to be a digital ID. It had to be something that worked online on the cloud. And so we looked at things around the world, and there was nothing really that was done the way we had thought of it. We also realized that in the political space, windows of opportunity open and shut very quickly. So it was very important that before the climate changes, we had to get enough speed and scale to make it irreversible. So we designed it to be very lightweight, very minimalistic, with rapid rollout capabilities, with an architecture and business model that was highly scalable. And when I stepped down after 4.5 years, we had issued 600 million people an ID. And fortunately, the government change happened, but the new government has also supported the program, and it's crossed about 800 million IDs, and it should be 1 billion IDs by December. So it's built to scale up. And I was...
I think that counts as scale.
so.
Yeah. So in fact, I was delighted. I was here yesterday talking to Barry Curzon. And Barry, can you show your ID to them? So Barry spends a lot of time in India with the Dalai Lama, and he's also enrolled into the Aadhaar system. So
Barry spends a lot of time looking for no self, and now I'm a unique identity.
so Barry is one of those 800 million people. Now, also we decided to build this in a way that we used new actors. The historical model in government to do a large project is you create a huge organization, you hire a lot of people, and then you spend a lot of money on buying stuff and all that. And we said, no, there's a different way to do this. So we came up with a business model where entrepreneurs invested in the technology. And because they invest in technology, they had an economic incentive to use it efficiently and effectively to get rapid scale. And we paid them only on successful outcomes. So we went from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. It was essentially a transaction-based model. So today, the government spends just a little over $1 per person to give these IDs. And so the project has spent less than $1 billion for 800 million people. No, maybe a little over $1 billion. And we also looked at the internet and GPS, which were designed to be platforms of innovation. They were not designed to be, but they became platforms of innovation. And there's a reason for that, because of the way they were architected. So you had networks, and then you had the World Wide Web, and you had the browser, and then you had eBay. So all these things happened. So we designed this not to be for one application only, but a platform for applications. So it's used for financial inclusion, subsidy reforms, attendance systems, you name it. It's got a whole, and we think in the coming year, the private sector innovation will be actually even bigger than the government use of this platform. So I think a lot of the lessons have been echoed. I mean, we brought in new actors, we brought in the private guys to build a new business model. Even the technology was repurposed, like you talked about, Sally talked about, historically, the problem was, how do you give a unique number to 1 billion people? So that was the problem, right? So we said the only way you can crack this problem is by using biometrics. Now, in the West, biometrics has different connotation. It's either in forensics, the Perry Mason novel, the fingerprint on the glass to find the murderer and all that. Or after 9/11, it's been used for security. So when a non-American lands at JFK airport, he gives his fingerprints or iris or whatever to see whether he's a terrorist or not. So that has been the historical use of biometric technology. We flipped it around and said, can we use this to establish uniqueness across 1 billion people? And now we think we have about 99.9% accuracy on that. So, if Barry goes again to enroll, he won't get a number, because we know that he already has a number. So that again is repurposing technology to a different purpose. So I think there's been a whole host of these things, and I'm confident that thinking of this is actually a way for governments to design public platforms, because governments have to build the platforms, and innovators have to build apps on the platforms. But getting that architecture right is very strategic.
I want to ask a quick question and give Bill a chance to speak, but after that, I also want to remind Sally and Roger, I would love for this to be a conversation. So if there are burning questions that you have based on something that these other folks are saying, please just jump in and push me aside. Bill, that talking about scale and a big vision, that little piece that you wrote, there was a lot in that. And you talk about restructuring society, and what that is really going to take. One of the things that you mentioned in there is a key to operating in this new reality is becoming an open, fluid team of teams. Have you seen any organizations that are really operating this way, and do you need to start out that way, or can more entrenched organizations sort of transform themselves to become that way?
I think this is already the new reality. You look at Silicon Valley, Bangalore, it's already an ecosystem like this. Our world is an ecosystem like this. So these are the facts that we're already largely into this world where equilibrium change is the new norm. And of course you have to organize differently, and people have to have different skills. But how do we get there? And I think this is really the challenge that we all have at the moment. And if I may slip into the framework change point, it is so clear that once people see what the new game is, then they know what to do. And they'll do it, especially when they see everyone around them seeing it. And that's the power of mindset change. It is so much more powerful than here's a different way of teaching or this next step for the environment. Those are absolutely necessary pattern changes, but the skill of bringing about mindset change is an absolute discipline. It's a different game than pattern change. So let me use the example of the American Civil Rights Movement. The U.S. failed for 400 years to deal with slavery and de facto slavery. And then the Gandhian methodology was applied by Baird, Rustin, and King very consciously to get the country to change its mindset. The Gandhian methodology basically is, as the rate of change accelerates, rules cover less and less. People have to guide themselves by empathy-based ethics, or they're going to hurt people and disrupt groups, and they're gone. So that's survival. If you can show to people that their behavior is in conflict with survival, they will change their behavior. And so it's a very conscious process to flip the thinking of the country. So many of you have probably seen the film Selma. Well, they chose Selma, one of thousands of nothing towns where life was horrible, because there were two churches that could lead a disciplined movement where for months, in the face of provocation, people would be loving and respectful, and then they had a jerk for the sheriff. So it was a constant flow of anecdotes, which informed the country for 6 months. And that was a conscious helping the tipping process. So, Vicky, all of us are, once you realize you've got to play this new game, then kids have to practice it. It's the only way you master this. Well, that's a new paradigm for growing up. That requires a framework change. So the impact measures, which is very important to have, it's part of the discipline, is what proportion of 7 or 17-year-olds, 12 or 17-year-olds know they're a change maker, and the only way they can know that is if they've practiced it. What proportion of the stakeholders in a school know that it's a success or not? Not by the old measures of information transfer, but is it a community that makes that the norm, that everyone is practicing change making? So those are two mindset measures, and how do we get there? So this has been our central learning over the last, I'd say, 7 or 8 years. And we've learned that there are 4 steps to the process. I've just articulated what the new paradigm is. So the first step is you've got to have a trigger, the least number of forces. Because we're small, we're always small, so you have the least number of forces. As they interact, they become self-multiplying. So schools, we just today in Oxford welcomed in an Oxford school as one of the UK Changemakers schools to be a leader in this process. The social entrepreneurs and writers and publishers, you can see how those fit together as a trigger. Phase 2, you've got to have wholesale partners, the unions, the teachers' schools. They've got to be in this. And you've got to make it open to everyone. The third stage I've just described in the civil rights movement, it's the actual tipping years when millions of people, you have to talk to them, get them the daily anecdote. And then finally, institutionalization. This is very brief, but we know how to do this. And it's really important that we get better at it, because once the framework is changed, then the rest is easy. No, well, easy is too hard, much too good a word, but it opens the way.
Vicky, you had a word that you wanted to say?
In relation to mindset changing, I think it's crucial. When we started this and became a national policy, and then we took it to 20,000 schools, and then the World Bank selects it as one of the 3 innovations that has successfully impacted national policies, and there's research evidence behind, then we had to scale down. I left the government, and I had to create an NGO, Fundación Escuela Nueva, esa Colombian NGO, to sustain the baby, because innovations are very vulnerable to political and administrative changes. However, because we had to compensate for what teachers, colleges, and faculties of education were not doing, we had to transform all this complexity into very simple, manageable action so that there was a teacher demand-driven approach to it, to overcome the unions. That the teachers would see results in their children. So we put in practice, it's a paradigm shift of teacher-centered education into really child-centered education, empowering children and youth. And this was crucial because once it became debilitated in the government, this is why we had to create the NGO, they were the actors of change, so they maintained it, even if it disappeared in the Ministry of Education. So this is interesting, the mindset dimension, but basically because they saw that they could have results. Once this rural schools outperformed urban schools, and we demonstrated evidence, and not only in academic achievement, but in peaceful democratic behavior, and social skills, and empathy, and cooperative learning. All these dimensions we've known in the theory, but that are so difficult to put in practice by an everyday teacher without having a PhD, as I always say that. So it was very interesting. It disappeared at the government level, but the teachers maintained the whole dimension and the momentum. So this is why we had to create the NGO to continue pushing this forward, because we had learned that yes, you can have a paradigm shift from a teacher-centered education. When we talk about these things in education, it's sort of boring, curriculum and teacher training and all these things. But I always like to compare with the health sector to send the message. If you bring a doctor from 100 years ago into a hospital today, that doctor is totally lost. Everything has changed. If you bring a teacher from 100 years ago into a classroom today, even in developed societies, the teacher is not so lost because everything has changed except the way of learning. So what we had to do was transform that conventional model of education into really child-centered learning, nothing new. But what is interesting is that we confirmed that more of the same is not enough in education. You have to have this, it's now called flipped classroom. And I said, oh my God, this is what we did in Colombia 35 years ago. Deeper learning, well, this is what we brought in the technology to promote higher level thinking skills in children, to promote independent learning, and that the role of the teacher was a different one, not just giving instruction. So a real catalyzer, somebody has more time to know how their learners work. So, we had to change the learning paradigm and get into changing mindsets. And empathy was crucial. So that was important because we learned that at the end, I can say my 6 takeaways after all this, so many years of work, and not only in Colombia, but in all Latin America. And also now, by the way, Sally, I'm partnering with Ann Cotton in Africa. I had to wait 2 years to see how I already worked with governments in Africa, so I said it's too tough. But I was looking for the right partner, so we partnered together. So we're learning how to partner among our Skoll Fellows, and I think that's very important.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I really like this, the point about mindset change and pattern in the two levels, and I guess my own belief in that is that you have to utilize both to get the sort of the flywheel going. So in some sense, we had social entrepreneurs. So obviously, Vicky and Nandan did not need the book to explain to them how to be social entrepreneurs. But you hope that by observing that pattern and being able to see what the patterns are and abstracting from that, you can drive the mindset change, which then creates more practitioners, so you get more data so that you can hone it and refine it. But I think it's a good thought, Bill, to point out the two levels. And in some sense, I think even though we didn't have your framework in our mind, the purpose was to see whether you could link those two implicit purposes, to link those two levels, go from patterns to the mindset.
I'm going to speak to something a little different. As Bill was talking about the civil rights movement and the intentionality of developing the narrative, selecting Selma, accelerating the policy change. And just interject Ferguson into the equation to keep us all humble. Just because we make these major strides, we enact these policies, society moves forward, we're not done because the whole culture, the whole society hasn't yet tipped in as profound and full a way as it needs to. So when we were mining lessons from our work over the years, one of them is just the nature of this time scale. And change, it can happen abruptly because of these tipping moments. Get Jeff talking on renewable energy and how he expects within the next 10 years we are going to be transformed as a global community in the way that we fuel our societies economically and in terms of renewables versus fossil fuels. So that transformation is underway. One sign of that is just how fiercely the fossil fuel companies are fighting back. I mean, that's a signal. But what I just want to say is that the battle is never won. There are victories that we can celebrate along the way, but Vicky reminds us, just because you get the Colombian ministry to adopt this new policy and scale it up does not mean the quality, the principles, the standards are really embedded, and there is that mindset change across the whole culture. So this is long-term work that requires, as Jeff said last night as he was talking about leadership, stamina. So social entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart, and it's not for the faint of will, and it really requires that we stay with it.
I want to pick up on that, and I know we're coming to the end of Act 2 and on to Act 3, where we can get all of you involved. But the one issue that I think you hit on there, Sally, that's been strongly implicit through this whole conversation and that was made explicit last night is leadership. I have worked on a lot of, I think, terrific books in my career on focusing on leadership, and it really strikes me how much all of this is talking about a model for leadership. And I would love to hear from each of you, and I know you said, Bill, in your short piece that it's going to take a new form of leadership to help bring us into and live with and be successful in the new reality. I think I'll start with Nandan, though. I think one of the things that you pointed to in your note to me was that it really takes merging people of different cultures, and that's a big part of leadership. How do you see what we've been talking about today as leadership, and what are one or two of the specific challenges that you see?
Yeah, so I think the challenge we had was, it was a government project, but it needed the latest technology, and that's not necessarily there in the government system. So I had to create a team which was one, people from the government, bureaucrats with a lot of experience of running government, and I had to bring in technology experts who had worked in the Silicon Valley or Bangalore or wherever. So we created this organization where we had people from a government culture and a very entrepreneurial startup culture. And our challenge was to get these groups to work together. One thing we did was the head office of this was in Delhi, which is the political capital. The tech center was in Bangalore, which was our technology capital. So we managed to use that method. But I think the key lesson I learned was that if the goal is big enough, if the goal is ambitious, if the goal is something which is transformational, then people are willing to give up those differences to get to that goal. So I think whenever there were differences of opinion or differences of culture or so on, we went back to the goal. And I think as long as we kept the goal in front of us, that was very important. The other part, I think, was that we had a lot of opposition from all sides. I mean, the establishment didn't like this new idea. The left thought that this was a plot to get rid of government benefits and go to cash transfers. The right thought this was a method to illegalize illegal immigrants. So we had opposition from all kinds of players. And we realized the only way we're going to win this game was to go straight to the people. And I think, so we got the government to agree to do a pilot of 100 million people. Now, what I learned was that as long as you call it a pilot, it doesn't matter. So it's probably the world's largest pilot of 100 million people.
Three times Canada, that's your
and
pilot.
So we rolled it out in 14 months and started enrollment. And all the people opposing it tried very hard to stop it. They went to the courts, they went to the political leaders to stop it. But I had a deck of photographs of people standing in long lines in villages to get this ID. So whenever a politician asked me, I would just walk them through the pictures, and after that, they wouldn't say anything else. So I think you have to go over the heads of the naysayers, go to the people, make them your allies, and show visibly that they are the ones who are with you. And once we got 100 million people on the system, then very, very difficult for anyone to stop that. And when the government changed, there were 600 million people on the system. So that, you had to continue, right? So I think that a lot of that is about that kind of leading from the front, painting a very compelling vision, aligning people of disparate interests to a common goal, and reaching to the people over the heads of opposition.
Quickly, Vicky, and then Bill, and then I want to get to the audience.
It's exactly the same. When I was in the bureaucracy in the Ministry of Education, nobody knew what was really happening in the middle of the jungle of Colombia. So the first thing I wanted to do was make visible those isolated teachers and bring their experience and their knowledge into the ministry. People were thinking I was crazy because I started working with those isolated rural teachers and bringing them into the ministry. So they're talking now about transformative leadership. It's a type of leadership where you empower your followers. So I think this was crucial because if they had not, I made them visible and they became leaders of the whole unions and all the teachers and the same. So it's not only to have an innovation, it's how to lead the innovation within a system. So I think this is what is crucial. So for me was, how could I work improving education in the poorest, most remote schools if I did not have those teachers with me? They were the ones that had the experience. So here again, to reinforce your point, Bill, empathy. It's extremely important. They were the ones that really knew, and they were the ones that were feeling the problems and the difficulties. And what we were trying to do is, with technology, at that moment, no new technologies, just transforming the concept of the traditional textbook. Teachers don't have time to plan every day, so we helped them with that. And just that sparked the whole process of change.
So, when systems change or equilibrium change is what we all live with every day. And all these changes are bumping one another. A changes, B through Z get changed, they bump everyone around them. That's the new reality that we're faced with, and it's coming on faster and faster. So the strategic environment for every organization, without exception, is not A fits B because they keep doing the same thing, but all this bumping and changing. So in that environment, every organization has to have everyone in the organization, not just the few people who are smart and tell everyone else how to repeat together, the old model, but you need everybody to understand the environment that they are working with, to make adjustments as it changes, to spot the opportunities. And then the 1,000 eyes have to think together quickly and spot new value-creating opportunities. And because it's new, you have to create a new team of teams. And by the way, that new team isn't going to be able to keep repeating because of this pattern. So now you have an environment where it's a series of teams where everyone is initiatory. And the half-life of the teams, you've got this goal, that's over with, now we're on to the next one, and the teams overlap and they're changing. Well, people just have to have really different skills and think about what that means for leadership. It's not a few smart people telling everyone else what to do. Leadership helps everyone think together, build together, change together. So a basketball team, the ball comes to each player, no one's telling that player what to do. They have to know where everyone is. And they make instantaneous decisions. But now the whole society has to be organized that way. And it is a fundamentally different type of leadership. It's more sophisticated and more powerful, not less powerful, but you've got to know how to lead fluid, open teams of teams. Envisage, enable, ensure. And everyone is envisaging. And you're helping everyone envisage, otherwise you can't compete.
Quickly, Roger and Nandan.
Yeah, just very quickly, on this leadership topic, like last night we heard about Sally having the good fortune of having a great mentor in John Gardner. I had a mentor, Chris Argyros, who taught me that if somebody's doing something and you'd like them to do more than that, just admonishing them to do that thing is not very valuable if that thing is obviously something they'd want to do. And so leadership is one of those things. Like most people want to be more leaderly, right? And just telling them be more leaderly isn't going to do much, because they would have already if they could have known how. And so a real focus in both the article and the book is not saying, be leaderly to social entrepreneurs. It's to get concrete, and that's what Chris taught me. He said, be actionable. Give them the things that they can do that result in leadership. Don't admonish them to be leaderly, and that's what we're trying to do. Here are the tensions you have to keep in mind. Here are the steps that you can go through. Here's the way you can think about equilibrium change, with the intention of allowing people who want to be leaderly to simply be more leaderly.
Just one quick question on leadership when you're doing massive change is the importance of building coalitions. Because when you take on something, the incumbent interest will immediately fight against it. So the negative coalition will happen anyway. Your challenge is to build a positive coalition that is more powerful than the negative coalition. And therefore, it can't be left to chance. You actually have to strategize, do a heat map of who's for, who's against, and then sort of build that coalition. For example, I used to try to convince environmentalists that ID was good for the environment. So they say, what's ID got to do with the environment? I said, look, if you have an ID, you can then have a bank account linked to it. You can do cash transfers. If you do cash transfers, you can remove hydrocarbon subsidies and give them as cash so that oil is sold at the market price, reducing demand. Then you can delink the subsidy from hydrocarbon and give it for solar, so it's good for the environment. So I think you have to connect the dots, build this disparate coalition, and make it more powerful than the inevitable negative coalition.
That's a great point. Want to turn to all of you all now. Hope there are some questions, and we don't have a whole lot of time left, so and it would be great to get in as many as possible. So if you could say who you are and try to keep it contained.
Thanks. This is Joe Sorrenzioni with Plowshares Fund. My questions for Sally and Roger. First, how can I get a free copy of your book? And second, you talk about how social entrepreneurs try to transform the social equilibrium by adding new actors. And you talk at the macro level, customers and government. Do you find that this also works in finer detail to achieve specific projects? Are there different actors that can enhance the success of the different projects?
Well, you'll have to convince Jeff that you are so influential that he needs to send you a copy of the galley as soon as that's ready on the first question. And on the second, I guess I would just say it operates at every level. We would say that an important thing for the social entrepreneur is to look at the equilibrium, ask who are the actors currently in bear, and it might be, you're trying to change the I don't know, the pollution in your little town. Who are the actors, and who could we potentially bring into the equation, even at that micro level? So I would say at all levels.
Yeah, I would just add a piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked about yet, because to get to the kind of mindset change that actually will fuel the policymakers to get their act together, and then the society will embrace the policy change. And you know this as well as anybody, Joe, working as you are on the Iran nuclear deal. You know how hard it is to get the wind at your back instead of in your face. I would say that we forget the power of storytelling. And so how can we tell the story of how societies have moved forward, what they did, where the agency of leadership has occurred, so that people can start to get it in their hearts as well as in their minds. And with those stories, that's the reason, Participant is making the films that they're making. And it's the reason in the book that we tell stories about the social entrepreneurs, about the work of these organizations over long periods of time, about the partners they've met along the way, about this journey. Because it is a journey and it is a narrative. So I would just add, as we're thinking about these as strategic problems, we remember that we're in a human journey here, and there are these narratives that we are actually really wired to understand. So being able to tell those stories helps bring these actors all along.
Another question? This gentleman?
Hi, my name is Sabri Saidam. On the question of moving forward and telling the story of nations that have moved forward, what would you say to nations that have moved backward? Thank you.
Sabri, I think you should answer that question. Sorry, I learned this technique from interviewing.
Would you mind I join the panel? Well, energy, and never live under the pressure of apathy. Always push forward, believe in yourself, believe in your people. And I've thoroughly enjoyed reading the book of Nandan when given to me by the Indian ambassador to Palestine, who said, read this book, it's about a pilot that covers 100 million people. I said, if only you invite Palestinians to India, I think they can be hosted over dinner compared to the proportion of population, and learn of the determination of people who had almost absolutely nothing in communities. And we live in a world of conflict, and we always have to be awakened every day to the fact that we have to push on with life and believe in ourselves and determination. Thank you.
Another question? Any others? Over here on the side.
Thank you for a great panel. I wanted to ask about what you think about the power of cohort in terms of changing the status quo, because I'm reflecting at this point in the formation of groups of Skoll social entrepreneurs, in the creation at Said and in other places. There are springing up various intensive seminars, things like Echoing Green, that are cultivating, and beyond the individuals and their organizations, the cohorts.
It turns out like the original purpose of the Skoll Foundation from the word go was to get social entrepreneurs together, was to bring them together, to celebrate. So I guess I think we've always had a view that if we could create cohorts so that they didn't feel like they were the only one doing this kind of thing, they would learn, they would be more inspired and the like. So I guess I think I and Skoll Foundation fundamentally believes that that you shouldn't just let that happen by itself if you can actually encourage and facilitate it.
Yeah, one of the interesting little lessons over the years is you would think it would be people who would be working on the same issue who would find one another, and it's not always the case. Often there are people working across very different issues who come together because they see things the same way. They're having the same kinds of issues with policymakers, or the same kind of issues with business, or they are business and they're having the same kind of issues with NGOs. So the way people find each other and the way they strike those relationships to create those networks for actually advancing the ball is actually very interesting. So I think that's picking up your team of teams idea, the network approach. At the same time, I think we need the intimacy and the trust of getting to know one another face to face. And so that's also part of what this forum and the way we intentionally gather social entrepreneurs with others who are actually trying to solve the biggest problems in the world. We gather them very intentionally together, but they also find one another.
I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Jeff.
Jeff.
Who's that guy? Hi, good morning, and thank you for this wonderful panel. I find it interesting that we're going from the fuzzy and qualitative yesterday of talking about belief and faith to the tactile and important thing about measuring and understanding what it is we're accomplishing. We at the Skoll Foundation and the Jeff Skoll Group in general talk a lot about social return on investment. And I wonder, Sally in particular, or Roger, if you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on social return on investment and how important that is to all of us.
Well, when you're asked a question like that by your boss, you better have a good answer, right? Partner. So go back to some of the issues that we're all talking about. Counting toilets, counting libraries, counting schools. Any idiot can do that, right? So that's not what we're trying to do at the Skoll Foundation. We're trying to see where the policies have actually led to the transformations. I'll go back to Brazil and I'll talk about the Amazon rainforest. We know that forests are important in the great scheme of climate change. Somewhere between 10 and 20% of emissions because of the forest sequestration capacity, as well as what happens when they're slashed and burned. So we know that the Amazon rainforest in particular matters to the fate of the planet and humanity. How do you get that trajectory to drop? Well, in fact, it has dropped, and we know what's driven that. So we are trying to teach those lessons to the entire world about how policy, how informed and leaderly policymakers, how NGOs, how technology, and how business can come together to build this more sustainable environment. That's SROI. There's a fellow out there whose name is Robert Costanza, whose work I follow. I don't know if any of you know of his work, but he's an economist, he's an environmental economist in Australia. He has calculated the value, monetized the value of ecosystem services globally. And it's something like, per year, it's something like $147 trillion. These are the values of coral reefs and the fish. This is the value of forests. This is the value of water systems. You know, after Katrina, $14+ billion in shoring up the levees of New Orleans. Do you know what would happen if we actually just built the watershed, if we allowed the watershed to return? You wouldn't need those levees. So we're trying to get smarter about those calculations. Not that everything can be monetized, but we're all paying the cost. There are very real costs if we don't educate our children, if we're incarcerating them. We can talk to a Bill Strickland who can tell you, $45,000 to incarcerate someone versus, $400 to give them an opportunity for education. You do the math, I can do the math. So we're trying to do more of that at the foundation. Not that we can monetize everything, but we can understand the unit of analysis, we can track progress toward change, and we can tell a positive story with evidence behind it. How'd I do, Jeff?
Yeah.
Okay.
if I can just chip in on that too. I think there's this mammoth opportunity because a super hard thing has already been done. So the problem with anything new, right, is data about anything new has not yet been created, right, or it wouldn't be new, right? Last time I checked, we have data about old things. We don't have data about anything new. The only way you get data about anything new is to let the new thing happen and then watch, right? And so when social entrepreneurship was in its absolute infancy, it had to be done on belief and faith because there was no data, because we didn't know what it would do. Now we've done it for long enough. All of you people have done it for long enough that I think it's now at a point where we can start doing those kind of measurements. So the hardest part is done, I really think, which is doing things on faith without data. People had to believe and just do it. Vicky, you just had to believe and just do it. And now we can measure the positive results. And I think that's the evolution this is going to take. And the more of that we do, the more the funding to this, the investment in it is just going to mushroom. But if we don't do the measurement, then we're being lazy about it, and we shouldn't, and we won't.
Last word goes to Bill.
Okay, so I think a part of framework change is very consciously figuring out what are the impact measures, not only for our purposes, but that'll be used in the new way society has to be organized. So in education, we are stuck with the measures that were created and were quite appropriate when the world decided we needed everyone to be literate in written language, which was quite radical. Those are the only measures we get, your point. So being able to think through really carefully, I used two examples earlier, what proportion of 12-year-olds in this class, this school, this city, whatever the unit is, know they're change makers, and how has that changed over time? That's a measure that helps everyone keep their eye on the ball. So choosing the impact measures and not mixing them up with operational measures, I think is a completely critical part of mindset change.
I think those are powerful notes to end on, and I want to thank everyone up here for a wonderful conversation, and thank you all for being here. Let's give a warm thank you to all of our panelists.